11th, 2007 is the night when Vince McMahon walked the backstage corridors of Raw, got mad at Paul London and yelled at him and eventually released him from the company when he got into his limousine and it exploded. Now, many people, when they do come to this story these days, are rightfully perplexed. It's like, wait a minute, they killed a character off on the Monday, and then by Wednesday, he was just back again. What the flub is going on? I mean, that is a terrible plan, all things considered, so it is an unsolved mystery. But it does have a horrible asterisk attached to it, because around the same time, we all found out about the Chris Benoit murder-suicide tragedy. It's just the worst thing ever in wrestling. And even WWE knew they couldn't keep this narrative up, so on the next show, Vince McMahon did walk to the ring, he explained the situation, and as he essentially said, we never spoke about it again. The whole thing was absolutely awful, and if you never watched again, I don't blame you at all, but trying to get a positive spin out of this, there was, of course, a plan in place, so I will try and decipher that as best as I can. Now, a huge reason WWE did decide to kick this out the window is because the first skit was meant to be Vince McMahon's funeral. I mean, can you actually imagine if they had gone ahead with this? I would have been one of them. I would have quit watching too. Even in 2007, McMahon was convinced he could get people talking though, and he was absolutely right, because I found an article from CNBC that mentioned traffic to WWE.com doubled overnight, and Google searches got so out of control that if you did indeed type, "Is Vince McMahon really dead?" you couldn't make heads and tails out of it. Then, of course, there's everything with Donald Trump. Triple H has told this story, because even he rang up WWHQ, and he's like, "Is everything all right with Vince? I heard something went down." Still real to him. Now, I suppose a large reason they were able to get this reaction is because, one, it was totally absurd, and two, they were deliberately pushing the essence of taste to see what they could get away with. As then director Kevin Sifley's talked about on the Steve Austin show too, he was told this very, very clearly. "Kerr, you gotta make it look like we're on the news." So he felt like he could shoot it in a way where people would go nuts, and kudos to him, he got it exactly right, because even people working at the arena rang EMTs, I guess because they thought Vince McMahon had just been blown up. And if it happened today in 2024, you just get individuals with their mobile phones filming the whole thing and then uploading it to TikTok. But I digress. When it came to actually making this work practically though, the explosion was actually filmed the weekend prior, because of course you do have to go get permits for this stuff. You can't just go make a bomb. And of course it helped too, because it meant when we saw Vince McMahon get into the limousine, all we did was cut from the live feed to the recorded feed. The car did blow up, and it's all about that Hollywood magic. But fair play, in terms of the technicality, did a good job. Cohen actually also revealed that there is a continuity error here, because if you watch both shots, it was raining on one of the days, so you can see a puddle, and then poop, the puddle vanishes. There was plenty of backstage reaction to this as well, with former writer Krista Joseph filling us in, like Craig David, and he had some right trinkets. And this goes down to the fact they'd already started filming that awful, awful skit for his funeral, and at the time, Joseph was playing Big Dick Johnson on TV. So let's just do a quick side quest here. For people that go, wrestling was so more serious back in the day. No, it wasn't. We had Big Dick Johnson. He talked about the fact he'd already been recorded sobbing at the side of Vince McMahon's casket. So of course, when the Benoit news came in, all of this had to be flushed away. They also told this awful story about Vicky Guerrero unstoppably crying. I mean, honestly, I don't even have words for this, and really, I don't know how we all got through it. Talent were also allowed to go home if they wanted, and we know the rest. I wish we didn't. Now, in terms of where this was going, there was a plan written down on paper, but as always, the paper wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because this was Vince McMahon. He could have woke up on any day and gone and headed in a different direction. It would be a whodunit story though, because even though McMahon burned in this vehicle, nobody ever saw his body. So I guess we would have to have hired an investigator. There would then be some sort of power struggle as people tried to take over the company, and I suppose Stephanie and Shane McMahon would be involved in that, when Vince would make his grand return and say that he faked his own death with an accomplice that very well could have been Mr. Kennedy. Now, this is so wild I can't even get my head around it, although you've seen the rumors, and if not, you can still find them on Google. But during this era, Kennedy was supposed to get a push, so I suppose this would have fit in like a glove. Now, obviously this all went bad because of backstage politics, but let's not forget this too. His name was Kennedy, and what's the middle name of Vince McMahon? If you're saying James or Edward or Steve, you're not listening, it's Kennedy. So because they did have this idea in the future, as always, WWE felt like they should have done something, which is probably why, from nowhere, Vince did have an illegitimate son, and it was none other than Flubbing Hornswoggle. So basically, all of this absolutely sucked. I'd much rather it was a mystery. Now, obviously, this angle isn't talked about much these days for the obvious reasons, but I just want to double back down on that point we talked about a minute ago. It just goes to show, when it comes to the world of sports entertainment, sometimes there's bad and sometimes they're good. But mostly, I don't think we should be involving death in any kind of professional wrestling angle. I mean, there's enough sadness in the real world. Don't bring it into the stuff you're making up on the fly. At one point too, McMahon had decided this was going to be the end of his character, but I don't think he ever would have lived up to that stipulation just because, well, you know what he's like. I mean, he was still on TV in 2022. That was 15 years after he'd gone and blown himself up. There were other wrestlers that felt this way too, even before the Chris Benoit stuff has happened, because as Mick Foley talked about on his own podcast, he totally hated this, and he actually got into a war of words about it with none other than Vince McMahon. Now, this was down to the fact he'd been doing a lot of outside work with people like servicemen and kids that were dealing with death all of the time, and he didn't think, rightfully so, it was a good idea for these people to turn into an entertainment program and basically have all of this tragedy thrown back in their face. Because once again, even though you and I may be lucky enough to not have anything trigger in our brain, you can't speak for millions of people that are tuning in every week. The real thing that got Foley though is that, of course, when you are younger, you just believe what you are seeing on the screen. So if you were one of these kids and you just lost a mother, or you just lost a father or a brother or a friend, whatever it may be, all of a sudden you also thought Vince McMahon had died. And again, just try and take yourself back to where you were a youth. That would send you absolutely crazy. And how the hell are you meant to process it? Especially when 24 hours later, he just pops back up and goes, oh, by the way, that was a story. You'd be totally perplexed. He also had actual fans come up to him and say, did Vince McMahon really die? And his only pushback to this from the boss was him saying, listen, Mick, our fans absolutely understand the difference. I'm sorry, have you been on the internet? That's not true at all. And more power to you, you can believe whatever you want. So even though there was other stuff going on, I really do think in hindsight, WW realized this was a terrible idea and it never should have been brought up as a concept in the first place. But of course, with the WWE Network, or in the future Netflix, or on Peacock right now, you can see this forever. And does it have an ending? No, it doesn't. But ultimately, that probably would have been even worse. Now it's time for you to get in the comments and let me know. Maybe you love this angle, I'd love to hear your take on it, but also make sure you suggest more unsolved mysteries so I, Detective Simon, can try and tell you why wrestling just stopped telling you a story, and I'll try and fill in the gaps. I'll do a terrible job, because I'm a fool. Also, please do like the video, share the video, and subscribe, and you can click the video on the screen for our first ever unsolved mystery, which was the Shane McMahon lockbox. And you see the connection here, don't you? Who's involved with that one too? It's none other than Vincent Steve McMahon. More importantly though, thank you very much for joining me today, and no matter if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, Craig David, I hope you have a terrific 24-hour period, and I hope the next 24-hour period is even better still. Take care, my friends. See you soon.